ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्।
Hello there, and welcome once again to an exploration of Gurdjieff's teaching. It's been a busy week. I was walking back from Brighton one day and thinking about the 75 million people who had died in World War II, and it struck me that one day this would all be over and I wouldn't be here anymore. I'm not sure why. I had a sense of the emptiness or the voidness. And I suppose our lives are quite short, and there is a lot to fit in if we are to survive. I also recognise these last few years, after the shocks we have had, what is inside people is revealed, as their bravado drops away. For many of the faces I see, there is not so much inside, and they have not had the cause or the opportunity to go into themselves. They have not been taught how to do spiritual practice. And for many they have not been received by someone who will hear their hearts, which I suppose comes first. Well, I was thinking that there are so many books out there and nothing ever changes. Those books are not written by beings. Very few books are. Gurdjieff says, "The evolutionary process must proceed without interruption. Any stop causes a separation from the fundamental. Such separate fragments of consciousness which have been stopped in their development can also unite, and at any rate for a certain time can live by struggling against the evolutionary process." So everything descends from the great ray, from the Absolute. But due to the fragmentation of octaves, there are pieces of information, pieces of knowledge that circulate, and one author may pick up a few of them and construct a book out of it. But he is not a being. He does not have an aim or a cause or a reason or anything to say. Can you imagine how many books there are? At most they contain within them a few broken fragments. These days, and coming from America, education has been commoditized just like McDonald's, and you can get a diploma to become a rabbi or to become a world leader, so-called. And if I return to the subject of America again, let's listen to some famous poetry.
The wretch concentered all in self, living shall forfeit fair renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the vile dust from whence he sprung, unwept, unhonored, and unsung. Sir Walter Scott.
Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott. There's something very strange about the American habit of sticking the author at the end of a quote like that. I can't even remember the poem. All I remember is the name drop. And that's the point. That is the difference between American education and European education.
You speak French.
And last week I talked about how the initiation of America, how the thoughts and feelings of the pioneers, their utopian vision, ideas of freedom and Marxism are simply an echo of the founding fathers' thoughts, and of course they are recorded on the rolls of those people. Riding across the ocean, singing songs about their conquest of a new world. They scrambled the roles in their centers and etched a new story, and that story still echoes today as it goes round and round and round unconsciously. Unless the man were to be conscious, in which case he could actually receive the energy. And so we see Gurdjieff's ideas of the roles presented once again. On the Nasdaq Stock Exchange is floated an American consciousness company, Gaia. But I think this shows once again that to gain spiritual knowledge and results is extremely rare, because it is that and only that will liberate you from this world and from your fate, and that nature is not very impressed with these games. I was in Costa Rica once with family, and we went on a tour to a coffee plantation up in the mountains, and as we pulled up in the bus I was very disappointed to see it had been turned into a tourist center for Americans with expensively packaged treats, and it is getting harder to keep a sense of austerity and realness when so much sugar is flooding our society. The sugar comes from the fragmentation of the upper story and also of the middle story. Thoughts and feelings that should be contained within the being particle duty of a being are leaking, and that is what we see. Even the staff in medical centers are becoming mechanical. The false self lives in the circulation of this fragmented material, in the domain of what is called the Prince of the Air. The false self cannot enter reality by any amount of study, but can only enter reality by being linked by a man who stands in reality. Gurdjieff says, speaking in general, what is necessary to awake a sleeping man? A good shock is necessary. But when a man is fast asleep, one shock is not enough. A long period of continual shocks is needed. Consequently, there must be somebody to administer these shocks. Therefore, I reiterate once again my advice to you to enter some type of school, selected for its tradition. Okay, I want to talk about vibrations, centers, and sound. Let's hear a few sections on the subject. Then a great deal was elucidated for me by the idea that each center was not only a motive force but also a receiving apparatus, working as receiver for different and sometimes very distant influences. When I thought of what had been said about wars, revolutions, migrations of people and so on, when I pictured how masses of humanity could move under the control of planetary influences, I began to understand our fundamental mistake in determining the actions of an individual. We regard the actions of an individual as originating in himself. We do not imagine that the masses may consist of automatons obeying external stimuli and may move not under the influence of the will, consciousness, or inclination of individuals, but under the influence of external stimuli, coming possibly from very far away. And I suppose the influences of the planets affect different people differently according to their type, which is astrology. But you see, mankind as it is considers this life of receiving ideas and carrying them out as normal. They don't see that as being a problem, because they have lost the sense of themselves as microcosm or as small gods, which is where the ancient myths come in. They receive an act rather than initiate an act. The section continues, Can the instinctive and the moving functions be controlled by two distinct centers? I asked G once. They can, said G, and to them must be added the sex center. These are the three centers of the lower story. The sex center is the neutralizing center in relation to the instinctive and the moving centers. The lower story can exist by itself because the three centers in it are the conductors of the three forces. The thinking and the emotional centers are not indispensable for life. I was thinking today that in the lower story, the body would be more like the physique, something simpler, like the body of a plant. The small rose that I pruned about 6 weeks ago is growing back very strongly, seems to be very happy sitting in the kitchen, and where one branch is cut off, several others can grow from. The body of a plant is simpler than it is for a three-brained being. You could call it a physique, perhaps. It has a body, but its form is not fixed. If I listen to a pop song, encoded in the convenient medium of sound waves are the rhythm, the melody, and the voice, or the moving center, the emotional center, the mental center. Can you see that? Those are the centers of the middle story. And what about the lower story? Is there something sexual in music? Well, of course there is. And of course, wonderful spiritual music is going upwards. And sometimes, maybe it would be possible to have all seven at once, if somebody was particularly gifted. I noticed this morning, in my morning practice, I do a 7-movement Qigong form, and I noticed for the first time that the 7th movement encapsulates all the other movements together. When it hits the octave, all the notes are struck together. A little more reading. The difficulty lies in separating the two kinds of influences. If a man, in receiving them, does not separate them, that is, does not see or does not feel their difference, their action upon him also is not separated. That is, they act in the same way, on the same level, and produce the same results. But if a man in receiving these influences begins to discriminate between them, and put on one side those which are not created in life itself, then gradually discrimination becomes easier, and after a certain time a man can no longer confuse them. And for the scientists, I guess they would say that none of these things exist because there are only sound waves. There is only the movement of molecules in the air. But when I hear music, it is as if a whole world is born within me. And, in fact, I create that world. And through the convenient medium of air, I receive the signals from the different dimensions and reconstruct a world based on them. What I hear and what I see when I experience music, I am creating. This week something happened to me that's never happened to me before. On 2 separate nights, I was visited by 3 people. One was a woman who I seem to have been intimate with in the past, and the other 2 were teachers who gave me direct teaching. In the last month I have added to my practices a fusion practice that comes from the Healing Tao school. I learnt it from Marie Favorito in Boston. It's about half an hour every evening. And the first instruction was to experience the Virgin Mary as a kind of stream of light, a higher kind of nourishment, which is related to some of the work I've been doing. And in the final dream, Mantak Chia himself appeared. He looked exactly as you would imagine a Taoist immortal looks, glowing eyes and powerful energy radiating around him, and deep love also, warmth. I asked him to teach me something, but he said he wasn't my teacher. I said, tell me something, at least. And he said that I should sing the elements of the Bagua that is part of the fusion practice. Kan li chen chui kun ken sun qian tai chi, and so on. The work is often extremely painful, and the pain is hour after hour, but it is also real after real. Returning home.